The way guitar pedals have evolved is pretty wild. We went from these huge clunky things to little simple boxes, right? But now it feels like we're seeing these single pedals turn into, well, these incredibly powerful multi-tools almost.
Yeah, and that brings us right to today's deep dive. The MXR M306 Polyblue Octave. It's way more than just a pitch shifter. People are calling it an octave workstation.
Yeah.
It landed, early 2022. And the idea behind it seems pretty ambitious. Basically be the ultimate octave tool for people who really like to craft their sound. So our mission today is to dig into the source material, figure out how this one pedal, the M306, pulls it off. How does it mix that modern, super clean pitch shifting with, that classic MXR grit and vibe? Okay, let's unpack this, see how deep this blue box actually goes.
Well, what's really interesting, I think, isn't just the number of features packed in there. It's how the M306 feels like a sort of a summary of MXR's history. It's not starting from scratch. It really integrates things. You can almost hear the old blue box fuzz, echoes of the Octavio maybe, but all pulled together in this modern hybrid thing, digital and analog working together. And the core of it, obviously, is the octave effect itself. It's built around 4 completely separate octave voices. Each one has its own level knob. Think of it like channels on a mixer. You've got sub 1, that's 1 octave down. Then sub 2, taking you way down, 2 octaves lower. And then looking up, you've got oct plus 1 and oct plus 2. So 1 and 2 octaves higher.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. That's a lot to play with. If you've got 2 down and 2 up, plus your original signal, you're covering a huge frequency range there.
Exactly. And that's why that dry level knob is, maybe surprisingly, probably the most critical control on the whole pedal. It lets you blend your clean, your unaffected guitar sound back into that whole mix of octaves. It's not just octave on or octave off. It's really like having a mini 5-channel mixer just for your pitch effects.
Okay, so it's a modern pedal, right? So the big advantage should be tracking. I think everyone's had that experience with an old analog octave pedal where you hit a chord and it just completely freaks out. How does the M306 handle that? What's the deal with tracking?
Right, and that's where it gets quite clever because it gives you options. It has 2 distinct modes. The default mode is polyphonic. That's the modern digital brain doing the work. It tracks really cleanly, really smoothly. You can play complex chords, dense voicings, and those octave notes, they just follow along. No glitches, no weird dropouts. That's the modern necessity, really.
But people still love that old school analog sound, the slightly messy character.
Exactly. So there's a switch and you can flip it into mono mode. And that changes the whole behavior. It becomes monophonic, like the old pedals. Now, you'd usually use this for single note lines, lead stuff, maybe some specific effects. Because while it gives you that fantastic sort of raw, vintage MXR character, it also brings back some of those, let's call them tracking quirks that people associate with older octave pedals. So you get the choice. Digital precision or vintage vibe.
The flexibility is pretty key, I think. Old pedals kind of forced you into one camp. But okay, let's be real. A lot of people looking at this pedal aren't just after clean octaves. They want the other stuff too. This is where it gets really interesting. If it's truly an octave workstation, those built-in effects are crucial. Let's talk about the fuzz. They say it's inspired by the classic MXR Blue Box. But, when multi-effects say inspired by, sometimes it just means a kind of thin digital imitation. Does this thing actually capture that thick, almost out-of-control sound of the original Blue Box?
Well, from everything I've read and heard, yeah, it does a remarkably good job. And the reason seems to be that the fuzz circuit itself is still analog, even though the pitch shifting is digital. It's a proper, dirty fuzz voice. And importantly, it affects everything at once. Your dry signal, and all 4 of those octave signals get fuzzed together.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so when you kick that fuzz on, you're not just adding a bit of dirt, you're creating this huge, harmonically rich, just wall of sound. It gets intense. And the way you control it is pretty neat, too. To save space on the pedal, there's a dedicated fuzz on-off button, right? Okay. But no separate fuzz level knob. Instead, you press and hold that fuzz button, and then the dry knob, the main blend knob, temporarily becomes the fuzz level control.
Ah, clever.
Yeah, it's a smart workaround. Lets you tweak 6 different levels dry, the 4 octaves, and fuzz without needing a pedal the size of a small car.
That is good design. Keeps the pedal board footprint reasonable. But the other thing that really pushes this into, experimental territory is the modulation.
Here.
Most octave pedals, they just do the pitch thing. This adds movement. What's the deal with that mod knob?
Yeah, the mod knob is kind of the secret weapon for really customizing the sound. And again, it's dual mode. The type of modulation you get actually changes depending on which pitch shifting mode you're in, poly or mono. So if you're in polyphonic mode, the clean tracking one, the mod knob dials in this rotor sort of Leslie-style spinning speaker effect. It's a deep swirling chorus or rotary sound, great for adding space and movement to chords, making things sound a bit like an organ, or just adding that atmospheric wash.
Okay, but then if you switch over to mono mode for the more aggressive single note stuff, the modulation changes entirely.
Completely, yep. When you're in mono mode, that same mod knob now controls a classic phaser effect, and they specifically say it's modeled after the MXR Phase 90.
Ah, the legend.
Exactly. So it's not just two pitch engines you're getting. It's like two different effects platforms bundled together. You get clean polyphonic octaves with a rotary speaker sim, or you get gritty monophonic octaves with that classic chewy phaser sound. It makes it incredibly versatile.
And for people playing live needing to switch sounds quickly, there's the EXP jack for external control.
That's right. That's where the modern side really comes through. You can hook up an expression pedal or an external foot switch, and you can set it up to do different things like smoothly sweep between two totally different settings, or just instantly turn the fuzz on or off, or switch between poly and mono modes without bending down. Plus, true bypass switching, tough metal case. It's built like you'd expect an MXR pedal to be built. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, the whole point of all these features is shaping your tone in really detailed ways. The question for you, the listener, is what does all this actually sound like when you start laying it?
Well, the low end sounds absolutely massive. Using those sub 1 and sub 2 octaves just creates these huge, deep textures. It really pushes the guitar into a different sonic space.
Yeah, reviewers definitely picked up on how well the sub octaves track, especially for bass players. If you're a bassist looking for those thick, synth bass sounds, or maybe a guitarist needing to cover bass lines, the M306 seems to really nail that. Creates sounds that feel really heavy and solid.
And then flipping to the other end, bringing in Oct plus 1 and Oct plus 2 gives you those bright, shimmery high layers. Perfect for ambient players building soundscapes, or maybe getting something close to a 12-string sound without actually needing one.
But the real complexity, the real magic, happens when you start mixing it all together. Just imagine, right? You could have your dry guitar layered with maybe sub 2 for that deep rumble, Oct plus 1 for some high-end sparkle, run all of that through the blue box style fuzz.
Oh, yeah.
And then add that swirling rotary modulation on top. You go from just a regular guitar signal to this enormous, almost orchestral sound that fills up everything. It stops sounding like just one instrument.
That kind of capability really speaks to modern musicians, I think. It's not just about simple doubling anymore. It's about like a 3-piece band, potentially sounding huge, covering bass frequencies, the main guitar part, and maybe some high synth-like stuff, all from one person.
Yeah, the best use cases really highlight that. Ambient or post-rock players who love layering textures, bassists going for those synth tones, lead players wanting really unique, soaring octave sounds, or just bands trying to get bigger sounds live without adding more members or gear. It makes a lot of sense for them.
It definitely seems to earn that Octave workstation label then. The pros are pretty clear. Tons of features. Great polyphonic tracking for chords, huge flexibility for getting weird or psychedelic sounds, and that solid MXR build. But with all this power, all this control packed into one box, there's got to be some things to consider, right? Some potential downsides or just things you need to know before jumping in. It's probably not a simple plug-and-play pedal.
No, definitely not. It requires some patience. Because you've got those 5 main level knobs, dry plus the 4 octaves, and then the fuzz level tied to the dry knob plus the mod knob. That's a lot to balance. You really need to sit down with it and spend time dialing in the specific sounds you want. It's not like a tube screamer where you just tweak a couple of knobs and you're good to go. The complexity is the flip side of the flexibility. And the other big one, we have to talk about power draw. This pedal is quite power hungry. It needs around 265 milliamps.
Okay, 265 millimA. What does that actually mean for someone putting together a pedal board?
Well, 265 millimA isn't just a spec. It's sort of the cost of entry for all that polyphonic processing and the built-in effects. It means this pedal will likely suck up all the power from a cheap daisy chain power supply on its own. You really need a good quality isolated power supply with a high current output specifically for this pedal. You absolutely cannot run it on a battery. And if you try to power it from a standard lower current output, you'll probably run into problems like the pedal cutting out or not working right. It needs a solid power source. It's a commitment.
And you mentioned earlier those tracking quirks in the mono mode. While the polyphonic tracking is great, what does a quirk actually sound like in that vintage mono setting? For someone who hasn't used an old analog octave pedal before.
Yeah, quirks isn't maybe the best word. Maybe character is better. It's not necessarily a flaw. It's that slight instability, maybe a little warble on the note, or sometimes the octave doesn't track perfectly if your playing isn't super clean. It's part of what gives those old pedals their unique, slightly unpredictable sound. But if you're expecting a perfectly clean digital sounding bass or organ tone when you switch to mono mode, you might find it a bit unruly. It acts like the vintage circuits it's based on, for better or worse. But what's fascinating here, I think, is what the M306 represents in the bigger pedal market right now. It shows MXR really embracing these hybrid designs, digital control and processing, mixed with genuine analog circuits like that fuzz. It's a smart move, keeping that analog soul alive while offering modern features.
And it's definitely a pedal board space saver, isn't it? It potentially replaces what could easily be 3 separate pedals: a high-end octave, a good analog fuzz, and a decent modulation pedal, all in one standard MXR box. So what does this all mean? Well, the MXR M306 Polyblue Octave seems like a really successful blend of different effects eras. You've got the modern clarity in the pitch shifting, mixed with classic fuzz from the blue box, vintage modulation sounds like the Phase 90 and a rotary speaker, plus modern control with the expression pedal input, all crammed into one pedal. It really does seem to deliver on being that ultimate tone crafter's octave tool, giving you just immense control over pitch and texture.
Yeah, it works because it doesn't make you choose between modern clean and vintage character. It offers both and integrates them pretty cleverly.
But that integration, that complexity, that's the core trade-off, isn't it? The high power requirement, the need to really spend time tweaking it. This pedal asks for a bit of commitment from the player. It needs the power, and it needs your time to really unlock what it can do. And that leaves us with a final thought, something for you to chew on. Looking at a pedal like the M306, with all its flexibility but also its complexity and the time needed to master it, where is effects design heading? Is the future more about streamlined simplicity, those easy single-knob pedals, or is it heading towards these highly specific, super deep, all-in-one workstation-type pedals? Which path really serves the modern musician best? The one who's maybe short on time but has big sonic ideas? That's the interesting question, I think. What kind of gear will we see next based on that answer?